your brain size. And when you're constantly creating cortisol and adrenaline, it's fight or flight, which could equate to, physical activity. But if that doesn't help, stress does not help if you need to study for a test, if you need to prepare to take a test, if you need to give a speech in front of your classmates or at work or something like that. And so I would say monitor your stress. And when I say that, I would say that we aren't aware of how much stress we're under on a day-to-day basis: physical stress, emotional stress, financial stress, relationship stress, and, environmental stresses and the like, because it's like fish in water. Fish don't see the water because it's there all the time. And a lot of people don't realize how much stress they're under until they're getting a massage or they're on a beach somewhere on vacation. They don't realize what normal really is. And it's so important to disconnect, to reconnect to ourself, because self-love and self-care is not selfish. And I think we need to prioritize this on a regular basis, which is why I'm such a fan and admirer of your work, because you're teaching people how to be their best self and with wellness approach. And these are all things that I really wish that all the things that you wrote about and you reported on was taught in school, much like I feel like the content that I teach in terms of learning is available, because how much easier and more fulfilling could people's lives be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I go back to that quote that you mentioned about if we realized how powerful our brains were, we would never want to tell them anything that wasn't true. And I think of also as parents, how much power we have and how much we need to be aware of that power in the words that we say to our children. And listening to everything you just said, I think kids are so naturally born with imagination and creativity, and a 2-year-old's brain is this wonderful mixture of the two of those things. And I feel like we as parents and as educators, we have to kind of adapt to this new world of technology, because in a sense, I look back to high school and I would get fed up with calculus and classes that I just, like you mentioned, I was bored by them. And I was like, when am I ever going to need to know this? And the teacher would say things like, well, you're not always going to have a calculator. You're not always going to have whatever tool. And now I look and I'm like, well, actually we do. We have our phones and we have the entirety of knowledge available at our fingertips through technology. And so like you said, I think that being able to adapt and learn quickly and think critically, those are the skills that computers can't do and that are so important. And I don't even think we have to teach them. Like you said, I don't think we have to teach kids this. I think we just have to preserve that innate, amazing creativity that they have already. And so as a somewhat selfish question, I'd love to know, if you were going to design a school or a learning environment, not even to call it a school, what it might look like and how it might be structured. Because this is something as a homeschooling mom, I obviously have to do on a daily basis. And we try to, for instance, keep like a very Socratic method and be very question-based and hands-on. And our whole classroom is movement-based. So we have balance boards and trampolines and swings and things. But I'd love any tips that you can throw my way or any other homeschooling parents' way when it comes to that.
Okay, so I wish I was homeschooled by you. That seems like such an incredible advantage, because it's the reason why you can get these kind of results is it's not even, when we work with our students, is because it's not even just about whole brain learning. It's about whole self learning, right? Where it's not just left brain, right brain, but it's all their intelligences, and it's their triune brain, their 3 different brains, where you're appealing to the reptilian brain and these different parts, their amygdala and all these things. We're talking about their conscious and their non-conscious, their unconscious. We're talking about their diet and their sleep and their stress management and their peer group and nutrition and all these different things. And so all of these play a role. And a lot of people, they just want the magic bullet, right? And people want this for their health all the time. They want the silver bullet, the magic bullet. That was the one thing I could do, the one thing that just makes everything better. And unfortunately, the one thing is like all these things. And what I would say is, but there are certain things that move the needle, and that's what I like to focus on. I just did a podcast about the difference between working smart and working hard, and everyone talks about it, but what is it functionally? And I open up with a story because I happened to be in this power plant in Estonia, and I was doing this talk to a bunch of teachers from Finland and across Europe. And when I was there, I recorded this podcast episode, and I was walking through this power plant. And the story opens like this, that there's a power plant and very, very, very active. And one day it just shuts down out of nowhere, it just shuts down, dead silence. And, the employees are freaking out. The operations manager doesn't know what to do. They try to fix it for a few hours and no resolve. So finally, operations manager picks up the phone, tracks down a local technician. The engineer comes down and he says, "You got to help me. We're losing all this business. This is very dangerous," and so on. "Please help me." And the technician walks around the floor of the power plant, and you see all these beams everywhere. And he goes to one specific beam, and has a number of electrical boxes on it. He goes to one specific box and he puts an X on it. And he opens up the box, and inside are what you expect, all these bolts and wires and screws. He goes to one screw and he turns it clockwise, just about a quarter of an inch. And all of a sudden, bam, the entire power plant turns back on. And the operations manager is floored. He's like, "Thank you so much. You saved a day." He was like, we thank you. He's like, "How much do I owe you?" And the technician looks at him and he says, "That would be $10,000. And then just enthusiastically, the operations manager was like, "What? Are you crazy? You were here for all of 5 minutes, 10 minutes. All you did was turn a screw. Anyone could have done that." He's like, "Give me an itemized bill." And the technician reaches into his back pocket, takes out a piece of paper, a notepad, and writes something down quick. He hands it to the operations manager. The operations manager looks at it and says, "I understand." And then immediately takes out a check and writes a check for $10,000 and gives it to the technician. When you look at that piece of paper for the itemized bill, it says something very simple. It says, "Turning screw, $1. Knowing what screw to turn, $9,999. And the lesson here is not that, we have a screw loose, right? The lesson here are two things. That in today's economy, knowledge is not only power, it's profit. Right. The reason why we want to teach children to learn faster is because the faster you can learn, the faster you could earn. And I don't just mean financially. That's obvious, right? But I mean all the treasures of your life. Even this young woman who helped save her mom's life by reading 30 books in 30 days, it helped boost the treasure of health and wellness, right? And so in a book, that's why I love reading and teaching kids how to read and making reading a habit every single day, because leaders are readers. It's the best exercise I find for the brain, whether it's children development or even for adults, especially if you can learn how to read faster. But the other lesson besides knowledge is power and profit is that there are certain what they call force multipliers in the military. Not that I subscribe to this, but it's just specifically to violence and stuff. But it's more that certain input, you can get much more output. And so these focal points, if you will, are like that X on the box or the screw. And what in your children's life or in your own life, what are the key ingredients that's going to give the positive change that's going to turn everything else on? Some people would refer to it as the first domino. Like the first domino that you hit, and then all these other dominoes get hit because of it. And so I like to focus on those 10 areas of self-care. Those are very specific leverage points that give you more return, more output for this, for similar input, if you will. But outside of that, in terms of what education could look like besides whole self, like wellness, because I think people can learn how to read faster or remember names or learn languages fast like we teach, but they also have to treat the hardware. So that's what a lot of those 10 things do. It affects I teach people the software, the strategies, but the hardware is your brain. So that's why sleep and good diet and stress management, all of that affects the hardware. Outside of that, we know that classrooms today aren't limited by four walls. Right now, you can learn anything on podcasts, on YouTube, and everything. And kids are growing up, one swipe away. They're growing up on joysticks. And what's sometimes difficult is when we sit them down and just lecture to them. And here's the thing with the human brain. The human brain doesn't learn by consuming information. It doesn't learn through consumption. It learns through creation, especially co-creation. It's not this model of being lectured to and sitting quietly by yourself, this assembly line education, one size fits all, because that geared us Because if you're stressed right now, the reason why adults are stressed is because we all grew up with a 20th century education. And the 20th century education at the turn of the century prepared us for a 20th century world, which was on the turn of the century was working in factories and farms. We had to be able to follow simple orders, right? We didn't need to be able to think for ourselves and do all these different things. So what I'm thinking is, education right now, we have access to the greatest minds on the planet, right? We have more access through the internet, whether it's on our phone or our laptop or whatever, or smart devices, than the leaders of this world had 20 years ago, with all the access that we have. And so we have great access. And so I'm thinking exactly what you're saying is that, we become facilitators, we become coaches, we be able to reinforce experiments. We're exposing children to diverse experiences. When a child exhibits strong interest in something, they develop certain talents. We provide them opportunities to be able to develop them. We support their brain health. We support their intellectual needs. We support their emotional needs, which is really important because children right now with social media, and again, I don't say technology is bad. I just feel like it's a tool that, I love it that we can learn all these different things, that we could stay in touch with our friends and our family. But, when you hear about Facebook depression and distraction, all these things where people feel like they're less than because they're comparing their life to their friend's life. And, everyone's posting pretty pictures of there's this beautiful life. And people feel like, fear of missing out. They feel like they're not enough. And I really feel that's our biggest fear, whether it's a child or as an adult, is that we're not enough. Because if we're not enough, we're not going to be loved and we're not going to be taken care of and we won't survive. I think preserving and in fostering that growth mindset by not praising so much ability and innate talent, but praising effort is so important in this process. I think getting them to study and really read and research, where you give access to books is a big predictor to success because it stimulates the minds, help makes new connections. I think being wary of when we're talking to kids about giving them labels, because identities are like genius or whatever or gifted or whatever could lead to an emotional strain in some cases. I think it's important also just to have your kids not tested, but more like as in IQ, but having them assessed to find out where their natural talents lie. Also just to test for things, whether it's ADD or dyslexia and stuff like that. I would also say that if people are having a sticking point in terms of managing their behavior, children, right? A lot of people try, even with themselves, to try to struggle using willpower or motivation to get a child to read every day or to study every day. Or even with yourself, as you're listening to this, I want to change a behavior. I want to stop smoking, or I want to stop procrastinating, whatever that is. That you don't just treat the behavior. That there's a much more enriched view, if you will, if you pull back a little bit from just behavior, that we've all suffered and struggled from self-sabotage, right? I think everyone can identify with procrastinating, putting things off. Why do we do that? Why do our kids do that, right? And I would say that if you imagine behavior as being one line of one level of transformation, if you will, a lot of people try to just motivate themselves or use willpower to change that behavior, but that rarely works. What I would say is look right above that level of behavior into this level of capability. Capability meaning your training. So for example, let's say you want to train a child to behave. They want them to read every day or to study every day, but the capability, they're not doing it. Maybe they weren't taught the capability of how to study or how to read faster or how to, we just did a whole program on how to teach kids how to study. We did a podcast episode. They put it on the front page of the LA Times for high school students and such, because it was such an important topic. And it was just like, they weren't capabilities. So some people don't study, for example, the behavior kids don't study, but you can't force them to study. Maybe if they had greater capability, they were trained how to study. In psychology, they have something called the competence confidence loop, meaning that a lot of people, when you get more competent at something, let's say it's studying or reading or playing golf or whatever it is, you become more confident at that. And because you're more confident,